Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're cracking open a really foundational concept in the world of corporate sustainability and reporting. We're going to look at exactly how we quantify the sheer operational scale of healthcare distributors. And to do this, we'll be relying on a very specific set of standard data points known as activity metrics. By the end of our time today, you're going to see exactly why these metrics are pretty much the secret decoder ring for understanding a company's true impact. So, think about this for a second. How do we accurately measure the environmental impact of two healthcare distributors of vastly different sizes? If I tell you that one company uses 10 times the amount of fleet fuel as another, or maybe produces 50 times the packaging waste, well, your first instinct might be to say the larger company is less efficient, right? But honestly, those raw numbers mean absolutely nothing on their own. They are completely out of context unless we understand the denominator. We need to know the true scale of their day-to-day operations, how much work they're actually doing to justify that fuel and that waste. And that missing puzzle piece? That's what we call an activity metric. According to the SASB standards, which are now under the International Sustainability Standards Board, activity metrics are defined as metrics that quantify the scale of specific activities or operations by an entity. Basically, their entire purpose is to normalize data so we can actually compare apples to apples across the industry. They are the essential denominator that gives real, actionable meaning to all the other sustainability data we look at. Okay, let's dive into this. We'll be covering the measurement challenge, defining activity metrics, tracking pharmaceutical units and medical devices, normalizing industry data, and lastly, looking at the value of standardization. First up, Section 1, the measurement challenge. The healthcare sector is incredibly complex. Companies are constantly having to balance cost reductions with serious efficiency demands, all while moving life-saving products globally. Let's illustrate this measurement problem a bit more clearly. Imagine a massive global distributor, right side by side with a small regional distributor. The global one is shipping millions of products across oceans, across continents. The regional one, well, they're operating a small fleet of trucks in just one single state. Naturally, the global distributor is going to have a drastically higher total environmental footprint. If we just look at total emissions, the global player looks terrible. So we desperately need a great equalizer. We need a standardized way to measure their activity so we can calculate their actual efficiency rate rather than just staring at their total output. Moving right along to Section 2, defining activity metrics. And this brilliantly illustrates how the ISSB and SASB standards pinpointed exactly what data points act as that perfect denominator. For any analyst or compliance officer watching right now, these two codes, HCDI-00.A and HCDI-00.B, are your absolute baseline. Without these two pieces of data, the rest of a company's sustainability report is incredibly difficult to contextualize. The boards didn't just leave this up to guesswork. These are the two definitive pillars of operational scale in healthcare distribution. That brings us to Section 3, tracking pharmaceutical units. Let's unpack the first metric here. Code HCDI-000.A. It mandates the disclosure of the number of pharmaceutical units sold by product category. Now, notice the specific wording they use here. It must be reported as a quantitative number, not the total weight in tons, not the total revenue in dollars, a strict unit count. And it's got to be strictly segmented by product category. This is absolutely vital because, a single specialty drug might cost $10,000 and only weigh a few grams. Meanwhile, a crate of generic saline might cost $50 and weigh 20 kilos. If we were to measure by revenue or by weight, our understanding of the company's actual distribution activity would be completely distorted. Now for Section 4, tracking medical devices. Next up is code HC-DI-000.B, and honestly, the logic here perfectly mirrors what we just saw. It requires the number of medical devices sold by product category. Just like the pharmaceuticals we just talked about, these medical devices, which can range from simple everyday syringes to massive, complex hospital equipment, must be tracked by their exact quantity and categorized accordingly. Because at the end of the day, the sheer volume of items physically moving through a warehouse and onto delivery trucks is what really dictates the operational reality of the business. Now, what's really interesting about this is the direct contrast between these two metrics. While they track entirely different product lines, pharmaceuticals on one side, medical devices on the other, they share the exact same structural philosophy. Both mandate quantitative tracking by number. By intentionally stripping away the financial value or the sheer weight of the goods being transported, these metrics isolate the pure physical activity of the distributor. It tells us exactly how much physical stuff the company is responsible for moving from point A to point B. Let's move to Section 5, normalizing industry data.
So having these two numbers is great, but how do we actually use them in practice? How do these activity metrics transform a standard sustainability report into a genuinely powerful analytical tool? Well, it all comes down to the math of sustainability. Step 1 is tracking an operational metric, like fleet fuel management. The standard requires tracking payload fuel economy, which is essentially calculating the fuel consumed for every kilometer you move a ton of revenue-generating cargo. Step 2 is bringing in our activity metric, like the total number of pharmaceutical units sold. And step 3, you combine them. When you take the total fuel efficiency and map it against the millions of units actively being distributed, you suddenly have a normalized efficiency rate. You can now look at that massive global distributor and that small regional distributor we talked about earlier and accurately determine who is moving a single unit of medicine to a patient with less environmental impact.
Let's move to Section 6 and see how this all builds together. The value of standardization. So the crucial point is, why does the ISSB insist on this really rigid approach? It's because activity metrics do not exist in a vacuum. They are literally the lens through which we view every other risk and opportunity in the sector. Look at the standard disclosure topics. Fleet fuel, we just discussed, but what about product lifecycle management? Distributors have to report the total weight of products accepted for take-back. If a company takes back, say, 50 metric tons of expired drugs, is that a lot? Well, cross-reference it with activity metric A. How many units did they sell overall? Suddenly, you have a percentage rate of returns. What about counterfeit drugs? If a company is utilizing RFID tagging for traceability, knowing the total volume of units they process tells us the exact scale and cost of implementing that technology. The baseline numbers give life to all the broader risks. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Without standardized activity metrics, are we truly measuring sustainability, or are we just guessing at scale? The next time you look at a corporate report for a healthcare distributor, don't just look at their total emissions or their total revenue. Look for HSC DIO 000.A and B. Look for the denominator, because until you know exactly how many units they are moving, you don't really know the company at all. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking the right questions about the data.